Welcome to Zorpazorp Gaming. My name's Lachlan Linton Keen and welcome to my Rohan at War predictions video. It's been an incredible time here in the community of the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Just 5 months ago we got our brand new edition, and just 1 month ago we got our very first supplement, Gondor at War. And the community's been incredibly excited, but the mood is starting to change. We're starting to look to the future and wonder what the next supplement from the Middle-earth strategy battle game could be. Now this week we got some incredible news from the Amazon TV series that it's going to be set in the Second Age, focusing heavily on Numenor and the Battle of the Last Alliance. And that's got a lot of people talking, kind of thinking that maybe that might be the next supplement for our system, but you heard it here first on Zorpazorp Gaming. I predict that the next supplement is going to be Rohan at War, set in the secondary theatre of Rohan versus Isengard during the War of the Ring. Now we got some incredible stuff in Gondor at War. It was a wonderful first supplement, so what I'm going to do today is go through all of my predictions on what I think is going to be in Rohan at War. First up, I think we're going to get a whole bunch of exciting new profiles and potentially some new models or new sculpts for existing profiles to accompany those. It's a really awesome time period, focusing heavily around the Two Towers and the events of the Two Towers, so there's a lot of really juicy potential there for profiles to dive into. Second, I think we're going to get some really epic legendary legions. We saw some really cool, fluffy, historical legendary legions in Gondor at War, and this whole conflict between Rohan and Isengard is just screaming for some awesome legendary legions. So I put together a whole bunch, 7, that I think are going to be really good and have a really good chance of featuring in Rohan at War. And number 3 is, of course, we've got our narrative campaign. Heaps of really cool linked scenarios to represent the whole story of Rohan at War. So, without further ado, let's dive into checking out the legendary legions for Rohan at War. So our first legendary legion is Lurtz's Hunters. Now this is a legion that I really do hope comes to fruition. It's an awesome themey list. Obviously we've got Lurtz leading his band of Uruk-hai hunters to track down the Fellowship and steal the ring for Saruman. Such a themey force. So let's have a look at our composition. Obviously it's heavily scout themed. The only troops we have access to in this force are Uruk-hai scouts. We've got Uruk-hai scout captains, and then of course our 4 scout themed named heroes. Lurtz, obviously it's Lurtz's Hunters, Ugluk, Vrasku, and Mahor. Our additional rules are, obviously, Lurtz's Hunters force must include Lurtz, and he is the army's leader, and any Uruk-hai scouts in the army may be upgraded to Marauders for 1 point per model. So this, of course, takes us beyond the normal rules that only the scouts in Mahor's warband can be upgraded to Marauders, and it gives the entire army that really juicy 8-inch move, really capturing their high-speed pursuit of the Fellowship. So our first special rule for the Legion is the traditional Isengard army bonus. Now this has 2 effects. It grants everyone who's scout themed in the list Woodland Creature, which is incredibly important for this army. Really helps that themey element of them smashing through arm on hand looking for the Fellowship, and it also allows models to not have to take courage tests for being broken until they've taken 66% of the army as casualties. They still break at 50%, but they don't have to start testing right away, which is a huge benefit. The second special rule is We Slew the Great Warrior, and that allows every Uruk-hai hero to gain a single point of might anytime they slay an enemy hero, and that may take them above their starting value. So obviously a hugely powerful special rule. Might is going to be incredibly important for a force like this. They're going to need to get that really nice positioning and really take advantage of their full move to get up to the enemy and get in there and start hacking, getting those heroic combats off with all their named heroes. So lots of exciting stuff there, and I think that special rule is really going to tie their theme and their force nicely together. So that is Legendary Legion number 1, Lurtz's Hunters. Let's have a look at number 2. Now our second Legendary Legion and our first for the Forces of Good is the Defenders of the Ford. Now this list is built all around the theme of the Battle of the Fords of Isen and the incredible bravery shown by the Rohirrim forces there. So let's have a look at the Legion's composition. Hero-wise, up first we've got Theodred, the heir to the throne of Rohan, who of course meets his untimely doom here in the Battle of the Fords of Isen. Up next we've got Erkenbrand, captain of Rohan on a horse, Elfhelm, captain of Rohan with horse, and Grimbold of Grimslade, the wonderful foot-slogging Rohan hero who doesn't have a horse and is really fantastic at upgrading troops to strength 4. In terms of warriors, we've only got access to 3 choices: the warriors of Rohan, the riders of Rohan, and the Rohan Outrider. Now, additional rules, this army can include Theoden or Erkenbrand, but not both, because they both weren't present at the battle at the same time. By the time Erkenbrand had arrived to try and save the day, Theodred was long since dead. Now, our second additional rule is that any warrior of Rohan in the army can be upgraded to a Helminga for +1 point per model. So this is, of course, taking Grimbold's rule that applies to his warband and allowing the entire army access to it, giving all of your warriors of Rohan +1 strength at 1 point per model, which is super awesome and super themey. It really helps you field a nice big combined arms force, which really accurately represents the historical forces of the Battle of the Fords of Isen. And our special rules do that even more. First up, off the bat, we've obviously got the Rohan army bonus, so all cavalry get +1 strength on the charge, but then we start to get into some really themey stuff. I'm pretty proud of these ideas. These are pretty sweet. The first one is called Hold the Fords. Essentially, all Rohan infantry gain the Shield Wall special ability. Now, not only is that really powerful, it's incredibly thematically accurate. For those of you who don't know the Fords of Isen battle, it's 2 battles back to back, which are really a whole elongated set of sequences and lots of different tactical maneuvers, but the big final play for the forces of Rohan to stop them from getting completely routed is that they form a massive shield wall of all of Grimbold's infantry, and they try and hold out as long as they can, waiting for Elfhelm to come and reinforce them with a big cavalry charge. Elfhelm never gets to make it because he gets headed off by a whole bunch of Warg riders and other Rohan forces, and so Grimbold has to do a huge big charge out of the shield wall and bust out to try and retreat to Helms Deep. And the shield wall holds for a long time, and normal warriors of Rohan are not going to be able to do that. So giving them shield wall plus the +1 strength is going to really thematically allow them to hold their own in combat, which is super exciting. Now, the next special rule that these guys have access to is To the Last Man, which is all Rohan warriors gain the Bodyguard special ability. Now, this is once again thematically representing the events that unfolded. The Rohan warriors, they were pretty bloody brave in face of some pretty terrifying odds, so I thought that was a really great way to represent that. And the third special rule, these guys have got a bit of special rule overload, is Protect the Heir. Now, this particular rule is all around a specific set of circumstances that happened when Theodred died. Essentially, he was in the middle of the ford on this little ayat, or a little island with the water going down either side, fighting off a whole bunch of Uruk-hai, and Grimbold was on the other bank. And he got pretty savagely ambushed, a big plan from Saruman, and he got cut to pieces basically. But just before he died, he called all the Rohirrim nearby to retreat to his position and defend him, and Grimbold charged out of his combat and raced across to get to him, and as he arrived to save Theodred, a final big half-orc dropped his axe on top of Theodred's neck, and he died right in front of him. Well, almost. He was bleeding out for quite some time and managed to say one more line when Grimbold finally got a chance to have a bit of a dialogue with him. So to represent that epic thematic moment, we have Protect the Heir. If Theodred is in combat and Grimbold is within 12 inches, Grimbold may call a heroic combat without expending the might to do so. If he wins the heroic combat, he must join Theodred's combat if possible, or move as close as he can. So essentially we're just ripping Daowine's special rule out of Gondor at War and swapping Theodred for Theoden, which is going to work pretty well, I think, and be super themey. So, an awesome little themey force there. I know a lot of people love to play the Fords of Isen, but they're just so not competitive if you take this kind of force without some big juicy special rules. So I hope that you guys think that's a really great Legendary Legion to capture that thematic moment. Now, jumping back to the forces of evil for Legendary Legion number 3, we have Sharku's Warg Pack. Now, obviously the Warg attack scene is huge from the Two Towers. It's a great moment. We've got the incredible scene of Legolas leaping up onto Gimli's horse and some really great combat. But of course, the Warg Pack was a huge force for Saruman in the books as well, and it plays a lot more of a pivotal role than just one scene where it kind of randomly attacks some villagers who are never really going to Helm's Deep anyway. It's really pivotal in the Battle of the Fords of Isen. It does a lot of flanking maneuvers, and just in general the Wolves of Isengard are absolutely vicious. So I had to put together a Legendary Legion for them because I think it's something that is really screaming to kind of encourage players to play that all Warg, or at least all mounted Isengard force. So let's jump into the army composition. Obviously we've got Sharku on Warg, you know, he's the big leader, he's got to be there, Sharku's wolf pack. And then we have Thryden Wolfsbane on horse, a Dunlending hero. I wonder where I'm going with this. And then we have Orc Captain on Warg, and that's it. There are 3 hero options. Now, we've got two infantry options, and I hear you saying, but Lachie, there's only Warg Riders in the Isengard force. Well, yes, we'll get to that. Warg Riders are option number one, and then we have Dunlending Cavalry. So, obviously, we're already jumping ahead to the new profile section that we're not meant to be talking about yet, which we'll get into a little bit later, but essentially, Dunlending did have cavalry. They were very rare, very few and far between. Stolen horses from Rohirrim and a few horses gifted from Saruman, mostly maintained for the really kind of noble bloodlines of the Dunlending force and rarely used, but they were used in the Battle of the Fords of Isen and some other engagements where they linked up with the Wolves of Isengard to go and kick some Rohan ass. So, a really interesting kind of theme there. We get to have a bit of Warg action, a bit of Dunlending Cav action, so it should be pretty exciting stuff. Now, we'll jump into our additional rules here. This army must include Shaku, who is naturally your army's leader. Dunlending warriors may only be led by a Dunlending hero, and Orc warriors may only be led by an Orc hero. Now, obviously, you'll notice straight away that there's only one Dunlending hero, and that's Thryden Wolfsbane on horse. So that naturally limits the amount of Dunlending cavalry you can have, which is thematically important because there weren't that many of them. So you can't have half Wargs and half Cav at high points. You're going to have way more Wargs. There were some Dunlendings there, but there's not, they don't have hundreds of horses. They're a very scarce resource for the Dunlending people. Now, let's jump into our special rules. Once again, we've got the Isengard special rule, break tests, only, taking courage at 66%. And then we have our second special rule, death to the straw heads. All models gain the Hatred Man special rule. So, look, this was a really interesting Legendary Legion for me to put together because you're losing a lot of options for the Isengard player. You're losing Uruk-hai, you're losing Saruman, you're losing siege weapons, you're losing everything. So I tried to really make this kind of juicy and appealing and give them some pretty sweet special rules that actually make this list kind of playable, because it's going to be pretty difficult. So Hatred Man gives everyone +1 to wound against man models, which is thematic and really powerful against man armies, but if you're fighting elves or dwarves, it's not really going to help. Then we have a second special rule, which is kind of a little bit more interesting and really themey, and it might look a little bit more powerful on paper than it actually is, but it has some serious potential for a really cool themey moment. So let's have a look at it. So the special rule is called Send Out Your Warg Riders. One model from every warband of Warg Riders may be put aside to be deployed as a scout. After all models have been deployed, you may place your selected scout models anywhere on the board that is not within 1 inch of an enemy model. Before the game begins, all of your scout models may make a normal move. If this move results in any charges, these combats are fought before the game begins. Enemy heroes may not call heroic combats during these fights. In addition, all Warg scouts reroll wound rolls against enemy heroes. So this is huge. Obviously we're heavily trying to replicate that epic moment where the Warg scout from the Warg attack scene leaps down and rips Harmer's head off, which is pretty hilarious, and we'd love to get a few kind of hectic stuff like that happening. You probably won't see it happening a whole lot in play because obviously players who are playing opposite this list are going to know and try and keep their heroes protected in their deployments, but it can at least apply some early pressure to opponents, particularly with where their heroes are going. It's going to get in the way of heroic marches and early kind of formations, and of course, if those wargs stay around and don't die, they're still scout wargs that still get the rerolls for the whole game, so if you can get them in on a hero later game, they're going to be pretty spicy. So, something really interesting and different for this list, and I think it's a pretty cool theme that is going to be pretty fun to play. Let's jump into Legendary Legion number 4. Staying with the forces of evil, we are jumping into Ugluk's rabble. Now, this Legendary Legion represents Lurtz's hunters after Lurtz has been killed. They have grabbed Merry and Pippin and are fleeing off back to Isengard, trying to deliver Saruman what they think is a fairly valuable prize, but of course, Merry and Pippin don't even have the ring, so they're just wasting their whole time, aren't they? So, let's have a look at our composition. Obviously, we've got no Lurtz this time, so we're starting off with Ugluk, Vrasku, Mahor, Grishnak, and our Uruk-hai Scout Captain. We've got Orc Captains and Uruk-hai Scouts and Orc Warriors. So straight away we can see that this is an amalgamation of the Uruks that flee from Lurtz's company and the Mordor Orcs who arrive to try and swing the hobbits over to Mordor. So let's have a look at our additional rules. Any Ugluk's rabble force must always include both Ugluk and Grishnak. Ugluk is always this army's leader. Orc Warriors may only be led by Orc heroes, and Uruk-hai Warriors may only be led by Uruk-hai heroes. In addition, Grishnak's warband must have no fewer orcs than Ugluk has Uruk-hai. So that little rule is just a nice little guarantee to force you into making sure that you're taking a small chunk of Mordor orcs at the very least, to make sure that we get that themey combined forces. Any Uruk-hai scouts may also be upgraded to Marauders at the cost of 1 point per model. So here we once again have the full Marauder application to the entire scout force, but of course they're going to be hampered by those slow Mordor orcs, which is incredibly themey. Now let's jump into our special rules. The first special rule is they run as if the whips of their very masters were behind them. Once per turn, Ugluk may call a free heroic march without expending a point of might to do so. So this is huge. Free heroic marches every turn. This looks crazy unbalanced on paper, but this army is all about speed. Once again, you're taking a whole lot of options out of the force. It's just a massive infantry, but you know, you've got no crossbows. All you've got is Uruk-hai scouts and Mordor orcs. So we had to give them something that made them really powerful, and getting to the enemy fast and getting in there is definitely the whole play. So I've gone all in on that theme. Now, to kind of pull the list back a little bit, we have our second rule, which is I don't take orders from orc maggots. And that is orc warriors may only benefit from the standfast of orc heroes, and Uruk-hai warriors may only benefit from the standfast of Uruk-hai heroes. So we're trying to represent the division in the ranks between our two forces. And now we have the third and final special rule, which is looks like meat's back on our menu, boys. Once per game, at the beginning of the move phase, you may elect to remove one model within base contact of Ugluk as a casualty. He cuts their head off, right? You get it. For the remainder of the turn, all models get +1 to wound. So, straight away you can see the tactics behind this legendary legion are heroic marches, fast-moving marauders, getting everyone into combat, calling that big special rule, getting meat on the menu, getting +1 to wound, and then just mincing everything as much as you can. And then hopefully late game, the fact that you've only got a mishmash of infantry doesn't come back to haunt you. So it's certainly got its strengths and it's certainly got its weaknesses. I think it's pretty balanced and pretty interesting. So yeah, I think Ugluk's Rabble is going to be a whole lot of fun for players to play. Let's jump into Legendary Legion number 5. Alright, so we've got 3 Legendary Legions left, and you'll notice that I haven't touched on the biggest battle of Rohan at war. So let's jump into Helms Deep. Now the first list that I've got here is the Defenders of Helms Deep, and this represents all of the troops that are stuck inside the fortress trying to fight off the massive horde of Isengard forces. So our army composition, quite naturally, is Theoden, King of Rohan with armor and shield, Gamling, Captain of Rohan with the royal standard, Aragorn, Strider with armor, Legolas, Greenleaf with armor, Gimli, son of Gloin, Haldir with heavy armor and elf bow, and our 2 warrior options are simply Warriors of Rohan, Galadrim warriors, and of course we've got Royal Guard in there as well. Now, we've got a few additional rules to represent the unique forces inside the fortress. This army must include Theoden, who is your army's leader, and Aragorn. Both of those heroes are so key to the defenses of Helm's Deep. Thematically, you just can't have it without them. Now, Gimli and Legolas must be deployed in Aragorn's warband if they're taken. As we know, your friends are with you, Aragorn. Let's hope they lost the night. So they must be with Aragorn, and elf warriors may only be led by Aragorn and Haldir. So that little additional rule kind of puts a bit of a constraint on making sure that you don't absolutely max out your elf forces, and you guys will see why I need to put that constraint in just a second. So let's jump into our special rules. The first one is give them a volley. All models re-roll failed hits in the shooting phase when within 6 inches of a friendly hero. So that's absolutely massive. It's like the Rivendell army bonus. I'm not going to butcher the Elvish, but on crack, basically. But pretty much, as you guys will see, all this list has going for it is shooting. Once you're in combat, it's like Struggle Street. And then the second special rule is we come to honor that allegiance. The Elven contingent of your force has a bow limit of 50% instead of 33%. So not only are you re-rolling failed hits, which is like hitting on 3s, rolling 1s or 2s, and then rolling again. It's pretty unlikely you're going to miss. But there's also, you know, a whole lot more elves with bows. So you can see why I naturally put a bit of a constraint, making sure that only Haldir and Aragorn took bows, are allowed to take elves in their warbands. So certainly makes for a really spicy list. I think it's a pretty cool themey representation. Obviously, shooting was a huge import for the defenders of Helm's Deep, and it was pretty much the only thing that kept them in the fight so long, so I think it's natural that that is represented in this army list. Certainly got strengths, strengths, certainly got weaknesses. I think this is a real kind of candidate for looking really strong on paper, but not being as awesome in-game, just like the Rivendell special bonus, just quietly. So I don't think it's too overbalanced, but if you guys do, let me know down in the comments and roast me if you disagree. So Legendary Legion number 6 is of course the Isengard forces at the Battle of Helms Deep, Isengard Unleashed. So let's have a look at the army composition. Now, straight up we can see we've got no named heroes. Uruk-hai Captain, Uruk-hai Shaman, Uruk-hai Drummer, Dunlending Chieftain, and then our siege equipment, the Siege Assault Ballista, and the Uruk-hai Demolition Team. When we have a look at our warriors, there's a lot more variety than our other legendary legions. We've got Uruk-hai warriors in all their different configurations, Uruk-hai Berserkers, Feral Uruk-hai, Dunlending warriors, and Wild Men of Dunland. So we can see, in terms of a theme perspective, we've got that Dunland flavor as well, which is really important from a narrative and thematics kind of historical point of view, and that's carried through the additional rules as well. This army must include an Uruk-hai Captain and a Dunlending Chieftain. Dunlending warriors can only be taken in warbands led by a Dunlending hero, and Uruk-hai warriors can only be taken in a warband led by an Uruk-hai hero. So straight away we can see that you have to have both elements in your force. Even if it's just one warband of Dunlendings and then you max out on Uruks for the rest, it kind of ensures that you have both of those flavors in there, which is of course incredibly historically important. Now, our special rules are pretty next level. The first one is of course just our normal Uruk-hai special rule, so they don't have to take courage checks for being broken until 66% of them is slain. But special rule number 2 is, well, it's pretty mental. I know it's going to be pretty contentious with you guys, but I had a look at this army and a lot of the strengths have been stripped away. You've lost all those incredible named heroes. You've obviously got no Cav. You've got no Saruman, so no magic. And you've certainly lost a lot of flexibility. Your main strength is just infantry horde. So I kind of really lent into that with this special rule. Let's check it out and we'll see what you guys think. So it's called Unrelenting Assault. Wonder what on earth that could mean. When a model is slain, put it to the side. At the end of your next move phase, roll a d6 for each model put aside in this way. On a 4+, that model may move onto your board edge as defined in scenario deployment. If you fail the 4+, then the model is treated as slain. So it's not completely without number from our narrative scenarios jammed into competitive play, but it's pretty close. You'll notice that if you don't get that 4 up, then the model does actually count as slain, so you don't have infinite models, but it certainly really leans into that horde aspect. Now, that looks absolutely huge, and I think it's another case of one of those special rules that looks really powerful on paper, but might not have that much of an impact. But I mean, it is pretty massive. But you got to look at the list as a whole, and they've got so little going for them in terms of no Lurks, no Ugluk, no Vrasku, none of those really cool Uruk-hai heroes, no Saruman, and no Cav. So I've really tried to lean into what this list does best to really give it some nice tabletop strength. If you guys think that's too strong, then by all means roast me down below, let me know. All of these predictions are just that, they're just predictions and they're all the start of conversation, so let me know what you think. But I think it's a pretty cool themey list, might be a bit too powerful, let me know what you guys think. So our final legendary legion, 4th Aerlingus, is a pretty fantastic legion, once again from that Helms Deep conflict, and I've tried to capture some really interesting thematics with this legion. Essentially, the legion has 2 components. It represents Theoden charging out from Helms Deep, riding down the causeway with Aragorn and Legolas and Royal Guard at his back, while Gandalf and Éomer plunge down and the Uruk-hai get trapped in between. So we've got sort of 2 constituent elements to the force. Let's have a look at who's available to our army composition. We've got Theoden, Gamling, Aragorn, Legolas, Éomer, and Gandalf. They're all mounted, and we've also got the Captain of Rohan in there as well. Our troop options are Riders of Rohan and Rohan Royal Guard. That's it. So let's have a look at the additional rules and see how it all fits together. This army must include Theoden or Éomer, and if Theoden is included, he must be your army's leader. So you can see straight away that I've shaped it so that you can choose to try and represent both of those halves of that kind of big pincer, or you can go one or the other. You don't have to do both, or you don't have to always include Theoden. Gandalf must deploy in Éomer's warband. Now that's pretty interesting because of course he's just gone riding around all over the place to bring Éomer to the rescue. He's not going to go ride off and do his own thing. He's going to stick there and be at the front of the charge with Éomer. So that should be pretty interesting. Aragorn, Legolas, Gamelling must deploy in Theoden's warband. Now that's pretty huge. Basically what we're getting is a super warband on that side of the table, stashed through with those heroes as they charge down the causeway together. So that is a pretty powerful powerhouse of a unit, but of course it does restrict the list's flexibility of sending all your heroes off in different kind of deployment patterns. It keeps them together. Thematic, but a bit of a restriction, but also strong in different ways, which is all about that balance that we're trying to go for with these lists. Now, Theoden cannot include Riders of Rohan in his warband, and Aemma and the captain of Rohan cannot include Rohan Royal Guard in their warband. So essentially we're trying to capture the thematics. Royal Guard are riding at Theoden's back, and Aemma's bringing all the Riders of Rohan down into Helms Deep. Now, Riders of Rohan within this list do not count towards your bow limit, just of course like the normal Rohan rules, so that you can not be restricted by having to take 66% Royal Guard or anything like that. Now, the special rules are pretty fantastic. I'm really stoked with these. I think they're probably the coolest balance between, well, they're very themey, maybe they are still too overpowered. I always love big special rules, but let's see what you guys think. So first up, we've got our normal Rohan special rule, +1 strength on the charge. Our first kind of special custom one is look to my coming at first light on the 5th day. While mounted, Gandalf the White causes terror in any turn that he has charged. So of course that's representing the epic charge moment where his big blinding light just makes all the Uruks absolutely shit themselves, and they lift all their pikes up and get absolutely squashed. So I think that's pretty cool. It's similar to the way, what's that big Iron Hills guy, Dane. It's similar to the way Dane's works. It's not too powerful, but it's seriously packing some punch. Now, the third one is absolutely crazy, and probably my favorite rule that I've come up with. I don't know about balance, it's pretty cool, but I feel like it's... Let me read it to you. Okay. The horn of Helm Hammerhand shall sound in the deep one last time. Once per game, at the beginning of any turn, you may use this ability. All enemy models must pass a courage test or suffer the effects of the transfixed magical power. Heroes may not use Standfast to negate these tests. So that's pretty massive. If you get some bad courage rolls, you've got like half an army that's transfixed, but it is only a once-off ability, similar to Theoden's death in the Riders of Theoden Legendary Legion. It looks like it can be super powerful on paper, but sometimes it might not go off. And I think this is another one of those cases. I feel like I'm riding the balance there, that it's pretty awesome. A lot of your heroes are gonna pass that easily. Your high courage enemies are gonna pass that easily. But I think it's got enough meat in it to really mess with your opponent and mess up their formations. And of course, having a lot of people getting terrified and transfixed when you've got a cavalry charging army who all need the charge, you can see how that synergy plays together really nicely. So I think it's a really, really nice kind of themey combination of rules, competitiveness, and fluff, which is of course what these Legendary Legions are all about. So that's my 7 predictions for the Legendary Legions. Honestly, who knows about the special rules? I'm sure they'll be quite different, or maybe I'll get some of them right. It's more about whether or not you think the special rules are cool, and whether you think I'm in the right ballpark, and the actual legions themselves that I'm pretty excited. I feel like I've got at least a few of them. It'll be really interesting to see when Rohan at War does come out, because it will, see how many of them I get right. So my second set of predictions is going to be the new profiles that Rohan at War is going to bring to the table. Every supplement usually likes to bring a few new things to really get the players excited, potentially with new models as well. So I put together a little list of things that I think are going to be on the way. Now let's start with that which I have already alluded to, the faction of Dunland. Obviously Dunland is a huge player favorite. It's not as massive as Gondor or Rohan, but lots of people really love Dunland, and they definitely don't have a lot going for them. But we have seen hints in the past. There was a big Dunland expansion planned. We saw lots of teasers of it back in Legions of Middle-earth, and I think we're going to see a lot of those really cool units come back to the fore. So my predictions are that we're going to get a few extra Dunland units. Number one is of course some Dunlanding horsemen. Now, as I kind of chatted about before, the horsemen weren't huge in the Dunland army, so I could certainly see some restrictions being placed on them. Perhaps they're only allowed to be in one warband, or they can only be taken by the warband of a certain hero, or some sort of factor like that, so that you can't hoard out. Maybe they're given bows, but that would probably make them too close to Rohan. I feel like they're just, you know, hacking away at things, very combat driven. But we've got to see some Dunlanding horsemen. The only thing that kind of pushes me away from it is that it would mean that basically a new plastic kit would probably have to come out, and I think MESBG is still a bit far away from new plastic kits, but we'll see how we go. I'd love to see them. Maybe it's more wishful thinking, but we'll see how we go. Now, I'm also thinking that we're going to see a couple of more elite troops to spice up Dunland's forces. Obviously, they've got the Wildmen and they've got the Warriors, which are their only two variants, but I think there's a couple of old War of the Ring profiles that were mentioned, and the names are very interesting. Dunlanding Berserkers, so obviously some kind of higher points, heavy hitting combat unit, and then Dunlanding Royal Blood Huskarls. Now, from the old kind of what we could glean of the old points values in Legions of Middle-earth, it looked like they were sort of like Dunland's answer to the Rohan Royal Guard. So something that was a little bit more survivable with a bit better courage, maybe some bodyguard special rules, but nothing kind of crazy, and that's where the Berserkers came in. They were only 11 points apiece, I think, or maybe 10 with a war gear upgrade. So, yes, Dunlanding Royal Blood Huskarls, some Berserkers, and some Cavalry, and then maybe we'll see a few new heroes. There was an old hero from the original Two Towers Special Edition, which was a Wild Man Chieftain, as opposed to the normal kind of Dunlanding Warrior Chieftain, who's that big armored guy, and that Chieftain model was something like 30 points or something, a really low-cost 2-wound hero who did not a whole lot, but he was just so cheap, like the kind of spiritual leader of the Wild Men. So perhaps we'll see something like that profile. And then one other idea that I had was I was reading through Unfinished Tales, and we get a whole lot of information about kind of the whole Rohan War, particularly Fords of Isen, and lots of other information about a particular character that the hobbits find in Bree, the Sauron, who looks slightly half orcish, and it turns out that he's actually a spy for Saruman, who was a Dunlanding outlaw. So I know that the guys on the Middle-earth team really like to dive back into to kind of deep kind of nooks and crannies of SBG lore to find these really cool characters. So I reckon maybe we're going to see like a Dunlanding outlaw if they try and go for another named hero for Dunland. There's not really many candidates at all. I mean, Thride and Wolfsbane, they're kind of invented. So I think if they're going to go for someone, that kind of spy who does work for Saruman and then the Nazgul turn him to work for Mordor kind of out of fear, I think he's got a pretty cool backstory, and it could be a really interesting character. That spy, that kind of subterfuge, and also he was very much a bit of a combat beast as well when he was working with the Dunlanding Hillmen. So, interesting character. Who knows if we'll see it, but we're definitely going to get something in the flavour of Dunland, and that's my big prediction for Dunland's profiles. Now, the other one that's pretty huge for me, because I don't think we're actually going to get a massive amount of profiles in this expansion, but the other thing that is huge for me is Ents. Ents have a huge problem competitively, because if you're not playing them in certain kind of point sizes, you can't really play them as a solo list. So, new character, we're going to see Quick Beam. It's going to happen. Everyone's been wanting a Quick Beam profile for ages. He's an awesome character. There were Quick Beam profiles that did exist, I think, in the War of the Ring book. So I'd love to see a Quick Beam profile, but of course the big thing that's holding back the Ent force at the moment in terms of flexibility is other troop options other than Ents. And of course it's staring us in the face, Huorns. We're going to see a Huorn unit. I think they'll be 50 points or 25 points, depending on how they decide to kind of cost them out, so that you can take that exact 50-point integer to slot in with 5 100-point Ents, or fit them around everyone's different kind of points cost with Treebeard in the end. So 50 points or 25, depending on what they make the stat line like. They'll basically be like little mini Ents, which I think will add so much, and we'll definitely see them in the narrative scenarios if they do decide to introduce that profile. Imagine the Huorns all rocking up at Helms Deep as you know, Theoden charges out and Erkenbrand and the infantry arrive, and the Huorns start slashing up some Uruk-hai. So I think that would be pretty awesome as well. So Huorns and Quick Beam are my big prediction for the Ent faction. Now obviously all of those profiles lend themselves to potentially some new models or new sculpts, particularly the Ent stuff, and I think that will be pretty exciting. I don't actually think we're going to see that many new profiles for the Rohan forces. We just got a whole lot of them from Gondor at War with those 1, 2, 3 new characters, and we've got buckets of heroes anyway in Rohan. But what I do think we'll see is potentially some new sculpts. Certainly for AMR, it has to happen. The only sculpt that's available is the really old one, if it's even available. Knight of the Pelennor is just non-existent anymore. I saw one selling for like 100 US the other day on a buy swap sell. So we have to get a new plastic sculpt of Theoden. That's my big prediction. And potentially, if they really lean into the Fords of Isen stuff with a Legendary Legion and potentially lots of kind of scenario exposure as well, we'll get a new plastic Theodred sculpt. He's a pretty sweet pro profile, but he's not going to see a lot of playing now with kind of the Riders of Theoden Legendary Legion. So I think if they lean into the Fords and really go down that thematic route, which they should, because it's the most epic Rohan battle, maybe, well, Pelennor Fields is obviously cool, but it's an awesome battle, a big favourite of mine. I'd love to see a new Theodred plastic sculpt. My only other little throwaway prediction is that if they decide to go for a Warg Rider Legendary Legion, is that we might get a little bit more variation, maybe something like Warg Scouts or some other kind of all-mounted unit that slots in with the Dunlending Cavalry and the Warg Riders. That's probably a little bit on the periphery of possibility, but certainly an option, maybe a new Warg Rider subtype or a new different profile, just to add a little bit more flair to that Legendary Legion if they go ahead with it. So the final element is, of course, our narrative scenarios. Now, some incredible events have unfolded in Rohan's military history, and I fully expect an epic narrative campaign to dive into them. Obviously, we've got that major theatre of war all around the War of the Ring, starting from the kind of first conflicts between Isengard's forces and Rohan, the Fords of Isen, and then invading and kind of all of that torture of Rohan right through to Helms Deep. So if we're going to see kind of a big chunky campaign, like another 29 or 30 scenarios, here's kind of my attempted guess or prediction at how those are going to break down. I reckon we might start with some early Rohan history. So Sons of Earl, Earl the Young kind of riding down to Gondor's age, and that really kind of setup of the historical background of Rohan and how the Rohan land was formed. I don't imagine it'll be more than 2 or 3 scenarios if we see it at all, but it's certainly a good chance to kind of, I guess, tip the hat to all the players who still have heaps of Sons of Earls from the last edition and Earl the Young, because we're just not seeing them that much anymore, and it will be really nice to have a few scenarios to field them. Then once we've got that out of the way, of course, we're diving into the War of the Ring bulk of the content, and this is going to be the main chunk of the campaign. Now, obviously, the first huge battle is the Fords of Isen, and I think we're going to go one of 2 ways. Traditionally, the Fords of Isen has been covered in previous supplements as 2 scenarios, the first battle and the second battle, and we could go that route again, but I feel like if they're going to try and get that 29-30 scenario mark, they're going to be kind of, I guess, not scraping the bottom of the barrel, but they're going to be looking to go really in depth. So the Fords of Isen, even though it is only 2 battles, the first battle in particular is a lot of kind of different elements, and in the similar way we've seen them treat all the kind of subsections of the Pelennor Fields, I think we could quite easily see 6 or 7 different chunks of the Fords of Isen battles being represented as scenarios. Particularly in the first battle, there's a lot of dynamic elements that are really disparate from each other, which will make for great individual scenarios, like Theodred and the Rohan forces leading a big charge to try and crush the Isengard army that is clearly massing at Isengard, and then getting absolutely overwhelmed and having to fight an epic rearguard, and then falling back to the Fords, holding the Fords on one side and then the other, Elfhelm starting to deal with Warg Riders and all sorts of chaos that's pouring down one side of the River Isen, while Grimbold's on the other, holding off all the forts on the west bank. It's crazy. So much happens. Definitely think there's great potential there for 6 or 7 big scenarios, and I would absolutely love that, so please do that, guys. That would be super awesome. I want to make a Fords of Isen board, so give me the justification. So after that, we're going to get into all of our kind of big Isengard invasion sort of scenarios, the burning of the Westfold, the Warg attack, all that kind of preying on the citizens and kind of the Rohan forces scrambling to defend themselves as Isengard pours into Rohan's territory. Of course, around that time, we're going to have Aomer and his Aered charging down Ugluk and his band of Uruks and Mordor orcs, who have, of course, captured Merry and Pippin, and we get that wonderful scenario that we've seen a lot of times before in a lot of supplements. I think there's even a version of it in the Armies book as well, so we'll probably see one more of those. In Gondor at War, we saw a couple of repeats that we'd seen before, so they're not afraid to make sure that they keep those historical scenarios so that the whole narrative flows in that one supplement, so we'll definitely see that one again. And then, of course, as we progress through all of these scenarios, we get to the big one, which is, of course, Helms Deep. Now, I'm pretty sure the way that they're going to cover Helms Deep is sort of like they've covered it before, and sort of like they covered the Pelennor Fields in Gondor at War. They'll break it down into all of its constituent elements. They'll have a Deeping Wall scenario, and a Causeway scenario, and a Keep scenario, and then after all of those bits, they'll have a huge scenario that represents everything happening at once. So if you want to play with big, massive amounts of army and points, you can really capture the whole scale of the battle. And I think that's a really great way to deal with it, because of course you get a whole lot of playability for players who don't have heaps of models. They can play the smaller versions, but if you just want to go all in and go crazy, you can play the massive scenario as well. So they're kind of my big predictions for the narrative stuff. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Either way, I'm just really excited for it. I absolutely love Rohan. You guys know I'm a huge Rohan boy, and as much as I love Gondor and Mordor and the Pelennor and everything, the big Rohan Isengard conflicts is so cool. There's something just terrifying about those sharp, angular, black armored Uruks just hacking apart these poor little Vikings on horses, basically, with their little flimsy wooden shields. It's really epic, so I think it's going to be an absolutely awesome supplement, and I hope you guys too. Do you think I've been absolutely crazy, or am I an oracle sent to you from the Messiah of SBG who is telling events of the future? Have I got anything right? Do you like my Legendary Legions? Do you think there's a chance of seeing any of those new profiles, or am I just batshit insane? Let me know down in the comments below. Let's have a huge big discussion about it. I'm really keen to see what you guys think. Do you guys think that there's other supplements? It's not even Rohan at War. Why do you think Last Alliance is going to be first? Or do you think that Rohan at War is going to come out first? Or what else have we got? We could have Arnor stuff. There's so many different options, but I think either way, it's a really exciting time, and these are just my thoughts on what we could get in Rohan at War. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I hope you've really enjoyed. I really enjoyed putting this video together. It was so much fun. So leave a like, subscribe if you're new around here, and check out all the other SBG content we've got on the channel. In the meantime, keep on SBG gaming. Cheers, guys.